Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. Welcome to another edition of Tag Tuesday. Today, I'm going to answer the prompts for the B tag, the second entry into the series of alphabet tags put together by Jem of Jem's Books, Reading and Stuff. Steve Donahue was kind enough to tag me this time. Let's get to the prompts. First, B is for Bildungsroman. Do you have a favorite Bildungsroman or coming-of-age story? Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte is my favorite Bildungsroman, I think. We watch an awkward and angry young girl who was mistreated by the family who housed her, received an education at a place that at first seems horrible, but eventually feels like home to her, a place which teaches her both reserve and a kind of self-confidence. As she reaches her adulthood, she faces what might be the central question of a lot of people's maturity. How do you balance doing the right thing with doing what you desire? For me personally, I read this book at a time when I was on the cusp of growing up myself. My body was changing as the beginnings of puberty were taking place. My relationship with my family was shifting slightly as I became increasingly independent. And I had just hit a point when I had started dreaming of what might happen after I finished school. Watching Jane Eyre transform herself almost felt like a model. In other words, although I did not yet know the word Bildungsroman, I realized that that was what I was reading. The second prompt is B is for beach. Be careful how you pronounce it. What would you recommend for a beach read? I'm looking forward to finding some time to read Henry Beston's The Outermost House, A Year of Life on the Great Beach of Cape Cod, first published in 1928. I asked a few weeks ago if any of you would be pleased or would be appalled if I read this book aloud on my channel, and I got a lot of positive responses. So you might be hearing more from this one. Another book, perfect for the kind of quiet beach vacation I often crave, is May Sarton's memoir, The House by the Sea, about her time on the coast of Maine. I have not read much Sarton for at least 20 years, but she was definitely a favorite of mine when I was in graduate school. I've just mentioned two books about beaches in New England, and the fact that I'm a Southerner whose family has lived right on the coast for generations probably means I ought to choose something more like the beaches I know best. And one appeared not too long ago in a box from its publisher. The book is Low Country, a Southern Memoir by J. Nicole Jones. She's writing about her experience growing up in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. From my reading of the back cover, it sounds like it will be a combination of an exploration of how history and folklore shaped her family, and the story of the explosive growth of Myrtle Beach that made her family go from poverty and debt to extreme wealth. One more Southern book that might be ideal to read on summer vacation is Kelly Mustian's debut novel, The Girls in the Stilt House. Set in 1920s Mississippi, it's about the relationship between two very different young women. I had the pleasure of hearing Mustian give a presentation when the book was first released that made it sound fascinating. Her interest in and research into the history of the area and time she's writing about makes The Girls in the Stilt House sound especially interesting to me. I've been keeping my copy aside, hoping to read it when we actually are at the beach for a couple of days this July. Actually, I want to head back to New England for a few minutes and mention two other really interesting beach books. Since Steve Donahue tagged me, and because he has such a serious connection to Martha's Vineyard, I want to talk about a couple of books set there. The first is The Wedding by Dorothy West, about how an interracial marriage in the 1950s shakes up a family and a whole community of folks who live in Martha's Vineyard. Many people who hear that description might assume that the family is white, but that's not true. The community where the events of the novel take place is a black middle-class and upper-class community. There has long been a black bourgeois community on the vineyard in an area called Oak Bluff, and there are quite a few histories and memoirs written about it. Although I've not read it, Sunny Hostin also has a book about the black vineyard community, published in May, called Summer on the Bluffs. Austen is apparently also writing about Sag Harbor on Long Island and Highland Beach in Maryland, two other beaches that were patronized by black beachgoers during the years of segregation, as well as now. Interestingly, there was a small black beach community in South Carolina which started in the 1930s, smack between a string of small, predominantly white beach towns, which now make up the conglomerate town known as North Myrtle Beach. The predominantly black beach is still independent, I believe, and is called Atlantic Beach. Atlantic Beach hosted such stars as Ray Charles and James Brown, the Drifters, Billie Holiday, Otis Redding, etc. Although there were middle and upper-class black visitors and business owners in Atlantic Beach, plenty of more working-class folks, some of whom took the bus up from Charleston, also vacationed there, even if only for an afternoon or a day. To my knowledge, there is no big novel set there, but it definitely needs one. Question 3. B is for best. What's the best book you've read this year so far? The best 21st century book I finished this year is Red Comet, The Short Life and Blazing Art of Sylvia Plath by Heather Clark. Very long, and I really loved it. My favorite 20th century book of the year so far was one I read on January 1st, Helene Hamp's 34 Charing Cross Road. And I think my favorite 19th century book so far was probably Cranford by Elizabeth Gaskell, partly because I read it with a fantastic group of buddy readers, and partly because I've read really shockingly little 19th century literature this year so far. Definitely atypical. I know that will change as the year goes on, and I add in books for both Jane Austen July and Victober. The fourth prompt. B is for bookshop or bookstore. Do you have a favorite bookstore? I'm quite fond of Politics and Prose in Washington, D.C. Second Story Books, a used bookstore, is also great. It's been a long time since I have actually set foot inside a physical bookstore, but I think the time might be coming soon. Question 5. B is for banned books. Is there a book you think should be banned? There are quite a few books that I totally want to ban from my own bookshelves, although I would not only allow bookstores to sell those books and libraries to allow patrons to check them out, but I would even allow my son and spouse to bring them into our house as long as they kept them on their own shelves and let me mouth off about them occasionally. And I will show you one of my favorite bookmarks right now. The next question really amuses me. B is for Bible. What is your favorite book of the Bible, and what trigger warnings do you think it should have? I'm very fond of the first book of Samuel from the Hebrew Bible, or Old Testament. The book starts with the story of Hannah. I also love the book of Ruth. Before I talk about the book of Samuel, let me say that although my first name is Hannah and my middle name is Ruth, I was not named for the biblical characters in the Old Testament. I was named for relatives, who were named for relatives, etc., who far enough back were probably named after the biblical characters. Although my mother and grandmother shared a name other than Hannah, my great-grandmother, who died long before I was born, was Hannah, as was her mother, and her mother, and her mother, back for at least 7 generations. My grandmother's sister was Ruth, and there are many Ruths going back as well. Anyway, my favorite part of the book of Samuel is its beginning. Hannah is desperate for a child, and she prays to God, promising that if she gives birth, she will consecrate the child to God. I'm not religious, except in some cultural form that consists mostly of celebrations of food, from challah to latkes, and from matzah to gefilte fish. But I find Hannah's, or Hannah's action, if you want to be more accurate, to be quite meaningful. Instead of reciting formulaic prayers, she speaks from her heart. I find the whole idea of petitionary prayer to be uncomfortable, personally. But there's something about what Hannah does, her deep sadness at not being a mother, coming out not just as asking God for something, but the story of someone who, instead of just following the standard practice, expresses something intense and personal. even though her expression initially makes people think she's crazy or drunk. Often Jews, at least, consider the story of Hannah to be the first example of personal prayer. I have no idea why this section of the book resonates so much for me, other than my name, given that I've never been a person of faith and never been a believer. If I had to determine what content warnings to put on just this part of the book, I suppose I would say that there is infertility, desperation, reference to alcohol abuse, perhaps inappropriate maternal requirements of particular behavior on the part of their children, since Hannah requires her son to devote his entire life to God. When that do, I don't think I could imagine that I would love this book if I read that list. Prompt 7 is B is for bookshelf. Show me your bookshelf or bookshelves. I'll link to a video down in the description box where I give a bit of a visual tour of many of my bookshelves. But since Steve Donahue tagged me for these prompts, I thought I would show off this one, mimicking one of his old shelves that he used to sit in front of when he was filming. My son and I put it together recently with many of the same books he had, plus a couple of others that always make me think of him. Instead of his little Lord Ganesha, we used poor Yorick's skull. And the final question. B is for Brazil. Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist has been translated into 70 languages. Have you read any of his work? And if so, what did you think of the books? No, I haven't. When my son was in his high school years as a homeschooler, he was part of a book club with some other brilliant homeschoolers and their parents. One year, when we weren't quite ready to put the book club aside, but knew our kids were unbelievably busy doing other things, we started to look for really short books. We also wanted to consider more global books than just books from the US or UK. So The Alchemist came up as a possibility. I've forgotten who actually looked into it, but whoever did suggested we quickly remove it from consideration. So I've never had any interest in picking it up after that. Do any of you want to stick up for it? Well, that's it for this tag and this video. Thanks for creating this great series of tags, Jim. I'm definitely looking forward to filming the C tag sometime soon. Thanks for tagging me, Steve. And thanks to all of you for joining me here today on Hannah's Books. See you soon.